Welcome to EP3. Simple to complex, we make energy modeling easy. In this tutorial, we'll be continuing where we left off with our multifamily residential building, and we'll create detailed building geometry. Started with this tutorial, we're going to start a new instance of SketchUp, and we always open a blank model in SketchUp whenever we're working with EP3. This means that the EP3 models, when they load, will load in the best and most clean way. So always start with a blank model in SketchUp and then open your EP3 model. So let's navigate to our wizard model that we created in the last tutorial. And we can see we have the same building geometry. We have the same HVAC systems, and we should have all of the same internal loads and objects that we had in the original model. Some of the dialogues are popping up on my other screen. I'm also going to open another instance of SketchUp, and you can do this by holding the Shift key down and clicking on the SketchUp logo, which I think is off screen for you, but the bottom of your toolbar, you can open a new instance of SketchUp. You hit the Shift key, select the SketchUp logo, and it will open a new instance. It will take a minute to pop up. There we go. So again, I'm going to open a blank SketchUp model. And this is the model into which I'm going to import our background images, which in this case happen to be DWG files. But in EP3, you can use any file type that SketchUp will import. So that means an image file, DWG, there's a long list of file types. And using a plugin, you can also import vector PDFs. So we'll go to File, Import. And select our multifamily apartment building UWG drawings and just hit import. So if we go to the SketchUp default tray over here and look at the outliner, if you don't see the outliner, go to Window, Default Tray, and make sure the outliner is checked. Outliner and Entity Info are two quite useful views or pieces of information to see in SketchUp. So we can see that this drawing came in as an object. And if you click on the little arrow, you can see all the different pieces that came in. So I'm going to double click to edit this object. I can either double click here or you can double click in the drawing. And I see that I have elevations. So this is the south elevation and this is the north elevation. And I also have floor plans. This is a ground floor plan and a floor plan for the upper floors. But they're not objects themselves. I want to group them all together before I bring them into my EP3 model. So I'm going to select all of the objects in the elevation, and then I'm going to right click and say make a group. And now my group is selected and I see it in entity info, and I'll rename it, just call it south elevation. Okay, same thing for the north. Make group. Yeah, make group and north elevation. And then for the floor plan, I'm just going to copy the upper floor. If we look at these two floor plans, they are essentially the same other than the entrance doors. And that the information on the size and exact location of the doors is something we'll get from the elevations, not from the floor plan. So I just need one floor plan. So again, select everything, right click, make group, and then name it floor plan. Okay, the next step is we're going to go back to our original wizard model. And before we get too far, I'm going to rename it. Save as. And we'll call it detailed geometry. There's a file there from test file. So detailed geometry, and now I'm just going to delete this existing geometry. I just want to get rid of it. I don't actually need it. I'll come back to this file here, and I'm going to select and copy the floor plan. So I'm going to use the keyboard, Control C, go to our detailed geometry model, Control V, and then I want to select a corner that I'm going to use as the origin. This isn't critical, but it's nice to line up your drawing origin with the SketchUp origin. So next I'm going to create a floor in EP3. So my building geometry outliner, when there's no building geometry, just has all these buttons up top. And I'll use the Add Floor button. We also have buttons for Add Roof, Add Site Shading, Add Building Shading, Erase Selected Objects, and this is a verification check for surface adjacencies. Down here we have a snap to grid setting, which allows our drawing to snap to like say I like to use a 6-inch grid when I'm using imperial units, or maybe 10 centimeters if I'm using 10 or 15 centimeters if I'm using metric units. Snapping to grid means that when you're tracing over a drawing, if there are lines that are kind of just next to each other here, it can be very easy to snap to one side for one zone or one wall and snap to the other side for the other zone or wall, and that will leave you with small gaps or overlaps that can really mess up your model later on. So leaving this snap setting on helps you create very nice, clean geometry. We can change those settings if we go to global settings, change to IP units, and under edit settings, you'll see our grid spacing is set to 5.99, essentially 6 inches. Okay, so now I need to add a floor. So I'll call this ground floor and give it an elevation of 0. The elevation is mostly important because a floor elevation of 0 or below will be assigned an underground floor construction type automatically. That can be changed, but you can also, anything that you set with these sort of mini wizards in EP3 can be changed within a couple of seconds later on. So I'll say the elevation is 0 and then click OK. And EP3 will take me directly into editing this floor. So you'll notice this little dotted box right around the origin. And that means that I'm editing this object. There's nothing in it yet, so it's very, very small. Before I start drawing, I'm going to click out of the dotted box until I get to my general SketchUp view. And I'm going to click on this drawing, and I'll right click and say Set Floor Plan. And then it will ask me to select a layer for the floor plan. So it's asking me to associate this floor plan with a floor. I only have one floor so far, so ground floor is pre-selected, and I'll hit OK. So now I want to edit that floor, but how do I get the little box back? How do I get back into the floor? And in my EP3 building geometry outliner, I can just click on this right arrow, and it will take me back into this editing mode. And toggling this exterior geometry view on and off will show or hide any other geometry or objects that are in SketchUp. So I'm leaving this background view on, and I'm going to just start drawing the building geometry. I like to start using rectangles. I find that rectangles allow me to draw geometry very, very quickly, and I end up with quite clean and nice geometry. So I'm going to use the rectangle tool by hitting R, And I'll also just pause for a moment to say, if you're not familiar with drawing in SketchUp, please check out the tutorials, the SketchUp specific tutorials that we've provided on the EP3 website. There are a couple that are excellent that just show you the very basic SketchUp tools that will get you drawing and navigating through SketchUp very, very quickly. So, rectangle tool, and I'm just going to start drawing. I'm not worried so much about where my spaces are exactly. I'm just getting the general outer floor plan of the building at this point using the rectangle tool. And you may notice that there's a little bit of movement of the lines after I draw them, and that's just our snap tool in action. So I don't need to worry about being exact. Okay. And as I'm drawing, you'll notice that I have these spaces popping up. Any SketchUp face that's outlined in this yellow color, that is recognized by EP3 as a space. Now, these are not actually logical spaces, and some of these ones, are actually exterior. So I'm going to erase these edges and these edges and just get back to my building outline. Now, before we're finished with our floor plan outline, we actually have two little courtyards or light wells in this building. So one here and one here. So let's draw those. Okay, this rectangle I'm going to leave because this is actually an elevator and I will keep that as its own space. And then I'll delete these two faces. There we go. Okay, so now we have our basic outline of our floor plan, and we need to go in and draw the actual spaces. So at this point, I'm going to switch to the line tool, and we can see that we have 4 apartments. There's one in each corner, essentially. So the zoning for this project is just a apartment by apartment zone, and I'll just draw those zones. I'll turn off the background geometry because it's actually a bit easier to use the line tool without the background geometry. Okay, there we go. So I have 4 spaces that represent apartments, one that represents circulation, and one that represents an elevator. I'm going to go through and rename these. Let's name this O1 residential circulation. O2 elevator. So it's already an O2, but we'll call that O3. And for these apartments, I'm just for now going to change the names. And you can see that the outliner here recognizes whichever space is selected. So it's quite easy to cross-reference one with the other. And we can also click in the outliner and have those spaces that are part of that space be highlighted. Okay, so we have these 4 residential zones, and I will click on them, select all of those spaces, and then right click and say rename spaces. Residential apartments. Okay. So the next step is to bring in the elevations. So we'll go back to this other SketchUp drawing and let's grab the south elevation. So Control C and Control V. So I'm just going to drop it flat into the general SketchUp geometry. Don't drop it inside of this building geometry. It will just, EP3 will just erase it. So we're going to drop it kind of loose into the SketchUp geometry. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use an EP3 tool to make it into an elevation. So that will position it correctly for us. So right click on the elevation and set EP3 set elevation. And I can choose to set the orientation either by choosing a cardinal direction or by entering a numerical orientation. So this one is south, so I can just choose south. If it's a numerical orientation, don't worry about the decimal points, just get it close. The EP3 algorithm in a later step will position it correctly for you. Okay, the next step is going to be to select a reference point in the elevation group or component. And you can also look in the lower left corner here. It will tell you what to do. Now, this pointer is a EP3 pointer, and it will give you some clues as to what you're doing. If you're on a valid point, it will highlight for you. So I know I'm on a valid point. Now, I want to select point on this elevation that aligns with this corner over here. So I'm going to zoom in and select this point here. Next, we can see that the tip has changed here. We're going to select the location of the elevation. So that's this point over here. There we go. And now the elevation has been positioned for us. Okay, so if we look at this elevation, we have, I think it was 9 stories. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And they're all exactly the same. So we're going to do the same thing we did with the wizard, where we have a bottom floor, a middle floor, and a top floor. And because the geometry is exactly the same, I can just copy the floor that we already created and copy it up to a different level. So let's select this bottom floor. I'm sorry, I'm going to click on it here in the building geometry outliner. I'm going to turn on the other geometry. Now at this point, seeing this floor plan is a little bit confusing. So if I go to the SketchUp default tray, I'm going to pin it here for a second. I go into tags under EP3. There's something called elevations, and floor plans, and I can turn them off. There are also some system layers which you don't want to touch, but the elevations and the floor plans you can toggle visibility on and off here. Okay, so I have the floor plan selected, so I'm going to move it, copy it, and I'm going to put it at the 5th floor level to represent sort of those middle floors. So to copy in SketchUp, we use the Move tool, which I got to by pressing M, and then you hit Control once, and you'll get a little plus mark next to the Move tool. Now I'm going to click a reference point, which is going to be at the ground level, and I'm going to pick a corner, and then I'm going to click again. Before I click again, I'm going to move straight up, and you'll see this line turn blue. If I hold the Shift key down, the line turns bold, so it means I can't move it left and right. And this is important because we want this floor to be directly over the previous floor. So while holding the Shift key down, I'm going to choose a corresponding line for the 5th floor. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For those of you in Europe, this would be the 4th floor, and this would be kind of 0. Now, next step is I need to change the material for this floor because this isn't an underground floor anymore. So I'll go to the materials dialog up here. There we go. And what I want actually is the adiabatic floor. We're going to have an adiabatic construction for the middle floor and the middle floor ceiling. We're also going to have an adiabatic floor or an adiabatic construction for the ground floor and for the ground floor ceiling and for the floor of the top floor. So I will select the paint bucket tool, and then I can just click on this one and it will actually select that construction for me. So I just click there, and that's changed the construction for all of the spaces on this floor. And looking at the outline, it's given this floor the name floor 1. I'm just going to call it middle floor. But all of the zoning is the same. Now I can do the same for the top floor. Let's do it a bit faster. There we go. And we need to change that construction. And rename it. The next step is we need to create a roof. So what height is the roof? I'm going to use a tape measure tool, which I got to by pressing T, and measure from this ground level up to this roof here, which is, we'll call it 85.5 feet. So roof, I'm going to copy the top floor, 85.5 feet, and there's no overhang or roof angle. Just hit OK. Now, I could do that again for the lower floors because we need to create roofs essentially for the lower floors, or I can just do the same thing and I can copy. And also, when I do this, if I use this reference point here, and I click on this corner and just copy it down, look what happens. Okay, but we also need to change the material of those roofs. So we'll give them the adiabatic material. And you'll notice a couple of extra lines were created, and this is just to eliminate the case where there's a hole in your surface. EnergyPlus does not understand surfaces with holes in them, so EP3 will go through that process of drawing these extra lines and creating a couple extra surfaces so you don't end up with surfaces with holes in them. Right, next step is to create our exterior walls, and in EP3 this happens pretty automatically. We're going to use this tool here. It says generate or regenerate walls. And I'll click and it says all walls, so we can do exterior, interior, or all. And do we want to do the intersections with the roof? So do we want to split the roof up and assign it to zones? And I'm going to say yes. This algorithm takes just a minute. There we go. So now we have some wall surfaces. So for me, the next step is to change some of these colors because I find them quite ugly. So we'll go to the materials dialog. Hello, materials dialog. Okay, and if you click on any of these color swatches, so we have the residential exterior wall construction, we can change the color based on the RGB scale. So I like to make exterior walls a bit reddish, and yeah, and then let's make the roof. Here's the roof. Let's put that in the darker red spectrum as well. Okay, that's better. So after that, we're going to add windows to the building. Before I do that, there's a little bit of a gap here between the elevation and the wall. And actually, there are a couple of different south-facing walls, and this elevation it needs to do for all of them. So in order to put windows on, the easiest way to do windows is to actually trace directly over this elevation. I'm going to click into the exterior walls, or you can select and go into the exterior walls here. So it's the same arrow that you have for the floor plan, exterior walls or interior walls. So if I go into the exterior walls and I can toggle this geometry, toggle this geometry on and off. If I select a surface and then I right click, and I go down, so I can go to EP3 and snap elevations to face. And that will just bounce those elevations over just a little bit. And then there was another option on there, which was add window. Now, with windows, if we go to the selected object dialog, and it's popped up on my other screen here. If we go to the selected object dialog, I can edit the height and the width here. The other thing I can do is use the SketchUp stretch tool, which I find to be much faster. So I'm going to move this window, and the performance information that I have for the glass includes the frame effect. So I'm going to make that window the size of the entire window, including frame. And then I'm going to use the SketchUp stretch tool. So you can either grab it up here on the toolbar at the top, or the shortcut key is generally S. And if you grab the corners, it will do a diagonal stretching. And if you grab top and bottom, you can stretch the vertically and then horizontally. And then I'm going to move it over to here and stretch again for this next window. And we're now sort of in the wall. I'm going to hit V, which gives me kind of an X-ray visibility, and then I can grab this tab. And I'll hit V again, which brings me back to normal visibility. So these, oops, I moved it instead of copying it. Leaving this selected dialog window open kind of slows things down quite a lot, so I'm going to close it. And then instead of moving the window, I'm going to copy it. So hit M for move, and then Control for the plus sign. Actually, my wall color is not a great color with this move tool, so we'll adjust the color a little bit. And let's make it a bit more gray. There we go. Now the move tool shows up a bit better. Okay, so I will stretch again. And now I'm going to select these two windows and use Control C and Control V to put them on this face, and then the move tool to just put them in the right spot. And I can do the same thing to move the elevations back to here. So Control C, Control V, and then orient the window. Now, when the windows go over the edge of the wall, this is a bit of an artifact from the wall thickness. I'm just going to bump this window just beyond the edge of the wall so that it's completely surrounded by the wall. And if I go to this side, I can actually grab, it should be the same size window as this, Control C and Control V. And I'm not going to narrate so much, I'm just going to draw. but you'll get the picture pretty quickly. I find that drawing building geometry in EP3 can be a fairly fun and relaxing activity for energy modeling. Okay, so this door we're going to draw it as a window as well, but we'll select, I think there's oops, um, there should be, well, we can create a new construction for a glass door. So create construction. And we'll click this box here and say, is construction glazing? And let's make a new glazing construction as well, or glazing material. So I'm going to filter object types, and I'll go down to the window material simple glazing system. Oh, and there is a residential entrance door fenestration glazing, so we can just use that. Residential entrance door. Here's the residential entrance door fenestration construction. But we can use the residential glass door, and then we'll choose a color for it. There we go. And again, I will position it and stretch it. Oops, let's grab the corner. And again, I'm going to move it up just a little bit, just to get it away from that edge. Okay, so next, I can do the windows on the next floor up. So I can actually select all of these, except the entrance door. I won't copy the entrance door, because next floor up, there's no entrance door there. And I'm going to select an edge as well, just to have a reference. So I'll do Control C, and I will go into the middle floor exterior walls. And I'll turn off exterior geometry just for a minute. There we go. And I'll do Control V, and this should, hello? Must not have copied. Okay, let's try this again. Exterior walls on the ground floor. Select the windows, except for the entrance door. And I'm going to select an edge here as well, to have as a reference. Control C. There we go. Control V. Okay. Now I can use this edge as a reference point to place these windows. And let's turn on the exterior geometry and just see how things line up. Okay, so these windows look correct. And we're not really going to know until we align the elevation with the face. So that looks, I believe, let's turn on let's go to the drawing. Now here, it looks like on the upper floors, And there is actually a little bit of a difference on the floor plan of the upper floors. So this wall actually needs to move back just a little bit. So let's go back and we'll fix that. So let's go back to here. I'm going to turn on my floor plan. And turn on that floor plan. I'm going to click all the way out because I want to move that floor plan up. Or rather, let's see. It's actually on this floor. So if you see right here, this area is a balcony on the upper floors. But here, in the first floor, I was wrong about these floor plans being exactly the same. And on this floor, they have a little bit of a bump out instead of a balcony. And it looks like that happens on all four corners. So we're going to go back and we'll change the first floor plan, or the ground floor plan. So I'll click into the ground floor. And just for a moment, I'm going to toggle this geometry off and just kind of see what's going on. So I'm going to draw a rectangle here. And I can start at the corner of the rectangle and then toggle the geometry. I'm going to start the rectangle here and finish it there. And then I will erase these two edges. And that should leave us, yes, with this 04 residential apartment. So we'll do that in all four corners. So I'll grab the corner here, rectangle to there. Now when you do this, EP3 will maintain the properties if you're joining two spaces, and that's essentially what we're doing. Because when we draw this little rectangle, we're creating a new space. So we have this new space right here. When you erase some edges to join two spaces, EP3 will do its best to maintain the properties of the larger or largest space. So if you're combining a lot of spaces, pay a little bit of attention to the order that you do it because that will make your job quite a bit easier. Okay, so now we can see that the floor plan is corrected, but we still have some other things that are not quite lining up. So we need to change the roof and we need to change the exterior walls. And this is a very simple change, so I may choose to actually just edit the roof itself. So I'm going to move this edge and we'll turn on the exterior geometry so we can get it to line up. But I will also turn off the floor plan. Don't really need that or the elevations. The other option could be to regenerate this roof, and if the geometry was any more complex, that's what I would do. But for simple changes, we can just make this change like this. And then we need to redo the exterior walls as well. Okay, so this is a warning that's saying we have a roof below another roof, and that doesn't make sense to us. And it asks if we want to delete these faces. We're going to say no. In this case, this is an adiabatic ceiling surface. It's not really a roof. So we'll select no on this dialog box. Okay, so for exterior walls, I could do the same thing that I did with the roof. And if I go into my exterior walls, I can just move this surface. And that works quite well. However, I could also select this ground floor, and if I go to my selected object dialog, I can click this button here and it has this up arrow symbol, which means I can regrow my walls, my exterior walls for this floor. So if I hit that button, it will redo all of those projections. And when it did, we lost this window here. It will do its best to maintain windows. And it maintained windows on the faces that didn't move or that didn't move very much, but it lost this one window. And we also put in a couple of extra lines. So again, I'll close this dialog box for performance. So I'm going to get rid of those extra lines and recreate this window. So we'll turn the elevations back on. Snap elevations to face. Control C, Control V. Adjust the size and move the window. There we go. So now we're back in action. So small errors when you're doing building geometry won't create large problems later on. Okay, so on this middle floor, we were looking at what is going on here, and we decided that there are balconies here. We'll go back to our drawings. So there are balconies here, 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 and here, and it's mirrored on the other side. So all of those are actually going to be full height, full length glass doors. Now the full height of the door is not quite shown on the elevation. It is shown on the interior, and we can see that it goes all the way to the floor. So let's just do a quick measurement. And I'm going to change my units to architectural, so imperial units to match the units I'm using in EP3. And then I'll use the tape measure tool and measure the height of this door. So 7'2.5" inches. Snap the elevations to the face, and I can draw a construction line, so 7'2.5" inches. Typing, you can see the actual length in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. So it really just goes straight down to the floor. And then I can stretch this down to that line. And again, I'm going to move it up just a little bit just to get it away from any edges, just to make sure there's no confusion about where that window sits. All right, let's turn the floor plan on again. Okay, so we're looking at this door as well, or that being a door. And we can see that here that we have this balcony railing, solid railing that kind of blocks our view, but we've measured the height. And I'm going to do both of these at the same time, and then I can actually move both of them at the same time too. I'm just going to type in 2 inches as well. Okay, so there, and same thing here. And this window is a little bit different. The top floor windows should be just about the same as this floor, so I'm going to select all of these windows. And there's a little bit of a trick to select all of them quickly. So I can select them here in the outliner. Actually, before I do this, I'm going to do the windows on the north side, and we also have a couple of windows inside this light well. So we'll do those before we move on. So to do the north side windows, I need to import the drawings for the north elevation. So we'll go to our other drawing, Control C, Control V, and again, we're just going to use the SketchUp tool, the EP3 tool to align our drawing. So I'll right click and say Set Elevation, this time choose North. And then I can select a corner here, and I will select the corner on the drawing. There. And there we go. Click into the exterior walls, snap elevations to the face. So that's the step where it will change the rotation of the elevation just a little bit if that becomes necessary. If the face that you've drawn is a little bit out of alignment with the elevation, EP3 will adjust the elevation to match your face. And I'm just copying these windows over from the other side because they're pretty similar. Actually copy. I copied just the ones on the face. Let's see. Yeah. SketchUp's pretty smart with its snapping tools, so it will arrange the windows to the right orientation. Forgot about this little wall here, so we'll just move the elevation back. Copy, paste. Now, if we look at the floor plan, this is one case where the window on the floor plan and the window on the elevation are not quite matching up. So we kind of have two windows shown on the elevation, and one kind of aligns with this window on the floor plan, and one does not. I'm going to go with the floor plan window. And for this door, just go ahead and copy and paste the door. All right, same thing we did before with copy and pasting of all of these windows. And a reference edge. So, we can go edit, copy. Grab the reference edge, snap to, and same thing. Let's see, where did we have balconies? So now we have balconies here. You can see on the floor plan here, here, and in these corners. So let's do those first. One, two. So you can stretch them both at the same time and also move them. Now this window is going to go back onto that wall. And again, these two, well, stretch them individually. So snap the elevation to the face, stretch this down, and move it up 2 inches. I'm just typing 2 inches to get kind of a consistent offset from those edges. It's not strictly necessary, but sometimes with the conversion to EnergyPlus, if you have windows that are right on the edge, it gives you some warnings about the subsurface not being completely surrounded by its parent surface. So for clean modeling, I just like to offset those windows from the edges just a little bit so there's no confusion. Okay, and then we also, if we look at the floor plan, you can see there are also a few windows into this courtyard, or into these courtyards. We don't have a particularly, we don't have any elevations for that. So I'm just going to take a little guess as to the size of those windows. Obviously, if this were a real project, you would want to know for sure what those window sizes were, but let's just create some of them and we'll see how that works. So for this, I'm actually going to turn off the elevation layer, and I'm also going to turn off the middle and top floors, and we'll just deal with the ground floor. Oops, I'm doing this wrong, so that's ground floor. Let's go middle floor and the top floor. And these ones, I can actually associate them with the middle and the top floor by changing, or I'm sorry, I can turn them off here. Roof 1, and let's see, let's call this middle ceiling. It's going to be ground ceiling, and that one is the roof. So turn the roof off. So now I can kind of spin around and look inside without having all the extra stuff showing. So we have windows here and here, and I'm going to choose some windows that are kind of a similar size and just copy those dimensions. And again, not being super picky about this, this is for demonstration purposes, and if this were a real project, I would have real drawings and we would know exactly what size these windows are. But SketchUp is really nice. It lets us reference things that are on a floor plan or on a different wall. So I can change the elevation, I can stretch the size, I can reference things kind of all over the place. There we go. So I'm holding the Shift key down to maintain this object on the axis. That's called inferencing in SketchUp. And so again, take a look at some of the tutorials that we recommended for people who are new to SketchUp to learn about things like inferencing, because that really helps align things in your drawing. Okay, so that's one side of courtyard complete, and then I'll do the other side. So this is where the stairway is. I'm going to guess that this is a larger window to let some daylight into the stairs. Okay, there we go. So that's all of the courtyard windows. Next up is to copy the courtyard windows and also the north windows up. Or, I'm sorry, we're going to copy the courtyard windows up to the next level. So there's an extension that I'm using, which is from TomTom, and it's called Selection Toys. And this lets me, when I right click, it will let me select only components. And that's very, very handy for changing and selecting which windows I'm using. I'm also going to select a reference edge, so hit Control and select an edge, and then Control C and go up to the middle floor, which I need to turn back on here. There we go, middle floor, and then Control V. So maybe we need to go back down. Let's try again here. Select only components, also click on an edge, edit, copy, and paste. There we go. Okay, I'm just going to put it somewhere, and then I'm going to grab that edge and point and stick it in there. Now, the windows on the top floor are exactly the same as the windows on the middle floor, so I can just select all of these, right-click, select only components, choose a reference edge, copy, and let's actually rename this top floor. Here we go. Okay, those are all of the windows, all at once. So that is our building geometry. Now, we have one last step, which is that this middle floor, we need to tell it that it's actually representing 7 middle floors. So if I open my selected object dialog, and I select this middle floor, I can give it a floor multiplier. The default is 1, but I'm going to give it a multiplier of 7. And here we have some detailed building geometry for a multifamily residential building.